Hey everyone!
Hey, and welcome to After Hours here at Linda's Electric Quilters.
We have an exciting topic for you today. We have people that come in the store all the time, new people, beginners to quilting, saw the sign and goes, "What is a quilt?"
Yeah,
and they all right, and they always ask us, like, "How do you make a quilt? Like, what do you do?"
What goes into it? What's the steps or the process? You know, my grandma or my mom used to quilt. I have no idea how it works. So tell me how to do it. And you're just like, okay.
That's like a class.
There's some steps involved.
So we said, why not put it into a video for you? So we're going to go step by step on what you need to do to make a quilt from scratch. All right, Corey, I think we should just get started.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so the first thing you want to do is kind of do some research online. Online, I mean, you can talk to friends, but if you're brand new to this, the best place to look is online. Look at different quilt patterns. What are you looking for? What are you trying to make?
What's your end result? Who is the quilt going to be for? Is it going to be for you or for somebody else? What size do you want this quilt to be? Because different patterns have different finished sizes for quilts. So it's always something you want to take into account. Of course, before you finalize on that final pattern, make sure that size is what you want it to be.
Exactly. And I would say look at the budget too, because putting a quilt together, a really fancy one, can be pretty expensive for your first one. So maybe start off simple for your first one, and that's what we're going to actually show you today. But anyway, while you're looking for quilts online, looking for ideas, once you've kind of narrowed that down, you could visit a quilt store to get a few things. So you could, if you're not quite sure, say you go and you're like, I've looked online, there's thousands of pictures and I have no idea what I want to do, but I really want to start off pretty simple. You could go into a store and you could literally just buy, say, like a panel. There's patterns that go with a lot of panels, or there's patterns that will complement lots of patterns out there. Or panels out there. You can also find quilt kits. This is just kind of one of the ones we have here. We have cuddle kits, but there's all kinds of quilt kits out there. That will have all of the fabric already in there. It'll have the patterns in there for you. So a quilt kit, if you're just not sure how to even start,
is a really good place to start
with. A really good place to start, like a simple quilt kit. Some other ideas that you can look at while you're there, say, I found the pattern that I want to do. But there's just all these bolts of fabric. Is there a simpler way?
Certain patterns, also, if you take a look at them, certain patterns will complement pre-cut fabrics. As a beginner, or even as more of an advanced person yourself, sometimes pre-cuts are a good way to go because they're already cut into those nice strip sizes. Like this is what we call a jelly roll, 2.5-inch strips on that one. And it has a complementing layer cake, which are 10-inch squares. So every pattern's a little different, but you will find some that complement pre-cut fabrics, so you don't have to, it takes all the cutting work out of it and all the guesswork out of it. You're just beginning to sew it together then at that point.
And you'll find all kinds of different sizes, different jelly rolls, pre-cuts, squares, fat quarters. Those are just a little easier way to go, especially at the beginning, especially if you have a pattern that complements it. Today we are going to actually show you a pattern that complements jelly rolls. Really simple, easy quilt to make for your first one. We're going to show you everything that you need to make it and show you the end result. So let's show them what they'd be looking at first.
All right, so the quilt that we are going to be piecing together today with all of you is going to be this one right here. And this one, like Diana said, uses the 2.5-inch strips. Or the jelly roll to make it. It's composed of 63 different blocks. You don't know that until you start working on it. And it uses a template that complements 2.5-inch strips. So it takes all the cutting work out of it on exactly where you need to cut to get these blocks to come together like they do.
Exactly. And you would look at this and you would think, especially as a beginner, oh, that might be a little complicated. But with the process that Corey's going to show you today, it's really not. So make sure you stay tuned and continue watching the video because it's really not that complicated. All right. So let's go overhead and show them what they're going to need for this project.
Okay. So in today's project, we are going to first start off with, like Diana was saying, starting off with a pattern to start with. Now, we carry the basics, and that's a part of the X Blocks family. And the basics template focuses on those 2.5-inch strips, those jelly rolls. So with this template, you get 2 free patterns. So we're already starting off ahead with the template. So once we open it up, you've got one pattern on the left-hand side, which is one that we'll be working with, and then you've got another one on the right-hand side. You'll see the finished projects in the template as well. And if we open this up, your template will be hiding right in here, ready for you to go.
Yeah, I just love how it's all organized for you, ready to go. Great way to get started. And then this template actually complements many other patterns that are out there.
Correct. So once you get really comfortable with this, then you could use it towards so many other things in your process of working with it. So we are going to be using, like I said, jelly rolls today for this. Now, this pattern originally calls for a couple of different fabrics. It's going to call for 5 different fabrics. We're going to break it down to only call for 3 different fabrics. And we are going to be using these junior jelly rolls. Now, junior jelly rolls are half the size of a normal one, so these are going to have 20 strips in them. And they still work the exact same way, still the same width. You just get less of that one color, especially if you're wanting to do, you know, certain quilts.
Yeah, so if you're doing, like you if you're doing multiple colors, maybe you don't want to buy 3 of the large ones because you're not going to make a large quilt right now.
Yeah.
So the junior jelly rolls are nice to do that. And we stuck to 3 colors on this to also make it more cost effective for your first quilt.
Definitely.
So,
so in this pattern today, the 2 grays will be using the gray jelly roll. The whites will be using this white off-white jelly roll. And the 2 yellows, we're going to be using this aqua turquoise color. This is going to give you a finished quilt of 40 by 49. And then we can get into the process of what else you need to keep going.
Okay.
So we got final block here. Have a good pair of scissors with you for cutting, for using little threads, you know, not for cutting your fabric, but for little threads. Have a Stitcher's Friend with you. If you haven't seen our Stitcher's Friend video, this is a really cool video. But the basics patterns require a scant 1/4 inch when you're piecing together, and we'll talk about that when we get to the machine. But this template has that scant 1/4 inch on it to align your needle for piecing.
It's a perfect little tool. 9 little tips in one, so you definitely want that tool.
Yes. Have some clear fabric grippers. They attach to the back of your basics template and keep it nice and steady when you are cutting. It'll save you a lot of time, trust me. A good rotary cutter, and then you'll need an ironing board and an iron, and then some type of cutting mat surface.
And then once you've got it pieced together, which Corey's going to show you how to cut and everything, we're not going to skip any steps, you definitely want some type of grid, like a flannel grid, to put everything up on, right?
Some type of design wall, yeah.
Design wall, thank you. So we actually have this fabric that you can cut and make your own, what do you call it, design wall.
Design wall out of it, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so anyway, we'll show you that. So those are just some of the things that if you have already, that's awesome. If you don't have, you will need some of these things to definitely get started making your first quilt top.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to set all my stuff off to the side here. And we are primarily going to start off with cutting and sewing at the very beginning here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my jelly rolls.
I'm actually already one step ahead of you. I got these already open for you.
Oh, well, there you go. I don't even have to open up a new one.
So we got the white ones that we need, the really pretty aqua turquoise, and then the gray.
Okay, awesome. So starting off with this section, you can grab either your gray and white or your blue and white. I'm just going to start with blue and white. So I'm going to grab a strip of my white, a strip of my blue, and then I'll grab a gray just to set it to this same side, and then I'm going to move all of my extra strips off to the side over here, so they're out of the way. So what I always recommend doing when you first open these up, you'll see they might have a little bit of a crease in them. Go ahead and iron your strips nice and flat. So you can bring your iron over. Let me rearrange some of my space here. Bring our iron over, nice and hot, and I'm just going to quickly roll through, pressing this down. Nothing crazy, but you just want to get those nice and flat. When they're rolled up in there, they can kind of change how that fabric lays naturally, and you want it to be nice and flat, so when you're going in and piecing it with your sewing machine, you're not running into any excess little humps or any surprises. So we've got that one. I'll set that back off to the side. Let's do our blue one. All the way in here, back and forth, back and forth. And you're going to do this to all of your strips that you're going to be using for this. And one little section of these 3 strips is going to get you 7 blocks.
Oh,
and remember,
nice.
you're going to have 63 total. All right, so offset that one, and then we'll do our gray one as well. Primarily, it's normally just the fold that you have to worry about, but it doesn't hurt to go through the whole thing. Throw that down. And there we go. All right, so now that we have that pressed, we are going to take a, let's do, did I say blue and white first? We're going to do blue and white. All right, so we're going to take blue and white, and we're going to head over to our sewing machine, and we're going to talk about that scant 1/4 inch that you need to piece this together.
So you need to piece them together before you cut them?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so over here at our sewing machine, the first thing we want to start off with is finding that scant 1/4 inch. Now, you'll have a hopping foot or a presser foot normally on your machine like this, but a scant 1/4 inch is a little less than a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and that takes in when you press your seams over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stitcher's friend, and the little seam press side, the little hump side, you want that facing towards you, and your scant 1/4 seam guide is right up here. With your foot up, you'll place this right underneath your machine needle. And I like to line it up with the right side of the foot so I have something easy to follow. So I'll line that up with the right side of the foot. And what I get to do now is get that hole right over the needle, drop the foot so it keeps it in place, and I'm going to slowly rock my needle down, and I'm going to see, and I didn't go too far, I went a little too far, I need to go back a little bit. I need to see if that needle easily goes into that hole. Right now I've got it set pretty well, but you might have to adjust your needle or move it over to the right or left to get that in alignment, but you will want that scant 1/4 inch. Always remember that for this pattern and for most of the basics patterns.
And if you're a beginner and you're not sure how to move your needles and do things like that, always check your owner's manual or visit your local store.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to take my first 2 strips, and what I'm going to do is just match up my edges at the top and then on the sides. I'm going to put this into my machine like so. Remember, following on the right side of that foot because we lined it up for that scant 1/4 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and start my stitching. And straight line stitching is normally pretty quick, so you can work your way through that. You can speed up your machine a lot, or if you'd like to take it slow, you can. Eventually your fabric will start to shift on you, so make sure you kind of stop, watch that, and reshift to the fabric as you're working that through. So we're just going to continue to stitch all the way down.
I think we should show them how you're holding that. Let's stop just for a second.
Okay.
Just because your hand's not in the picture, they'll be like, oh, what's happening?
Holding my hands, I'm kind of holding them like this, back towards the back of the machine, just to keep them even, and it helps when I'm shifting back and forth to keep them in alignment as I'm stitching. So I just kind of got it up, elevated, and I'm checking the foot as I'm easily switching a few things over. So we're finishing up on this section. I'm going to pause that, get that back in alignment. Now don't be worried if your strips don't end right on top of each other. They're not going to. Some strips are cut a little bit differently, like this one I'll show you. That didn't butt up right there at the end, but I wasn't worried about shrinking it or pulling it. You'll have plenty of fabric to go through. Don't worry about that. Just keep the one side together and then butt up that very top section right up there before you get started. So let's head back over to the iron, and we're going to press this down before we add anything else on. And I'll lay this flat, and I'm going to press to the dark side, and for this instance I'm going to be pressing to this blue side, and that means that when I open and fold this over, that the press itself of the fabric will be pressed over to the blue, where we'll have a white pushing up. And the easiest way that I've found to do this is if you're pressing towards a certain color, the color that you want to press to, or the dark side, you want to have that facing up. So I want to have this blue side facing up because that's what I'm going to press towards. I'm going to go ahead and lightly open this section, get my iron in here, start to kind of hold that there and open up the rest of it, makes it a little easier. And I'm just going to get right up to that seam, and that begins to flip it right over. And if you need 2 hands to do it, you can. Just flips that right over, and you're going to press that nice and down. You want to open that all the way up and press it nice and down. Just like that. And you'll see I'm kind of going in, pressing this over, and going back to that idea of, for this one, pressing to the dark side. If we look over here, you'll see that it is pressed over onto the blue side. It is not pressed onto the white side. So you'll just move up from that. Again, have your blue side facing up. Open that, push it with your iron to get that seam nice and flat, and then push over to that side. And you're going to do this for every single one of these strips that you make. So we've got this one pressed over, and pressing is probably the longest part, but it is the most important part. So don't be afraid to take a few extra moments to get that press nice and flat. So we're working our way through this. Again, just double check that you are pressing towards the right side, that the seam didn't flip over, because sometimes it'll get a flip on you. And as you do this, you start to move down your ironing board, so it's okay if you readjust yourself. You're going to keep pressing this all the way through. So, we've got that done all the way. Once we have that section, we're going to grab our gray strip, and then we're going to head back over to the sewing machine and attach the gray to the other side of the white. So we've got that set up. And we're going to head back over to the sewing machine. And what you're going to want to make sure you do, again, take your gray strip, and we're going to do it to the other side of the white. So the correct side that we started off with, remember, we had this nice and flat where the other side kind of extended. You want to keep that same idea. You want to keep these nice and flat together, at least on one side. So we're going to butt these up together. Make sure they line up. And line them up to this gray one to the right side of the white. We'll line this up underneath our foot, drop our foot down, and we will start our stitching. Pause real quick just to get back into alignment, and I'm going to speed up my machine a little bit more so we can zoom through this section. Now, in the process of this, it looks like our team switch feet on the machine for me. Now, if you have a 1/4 inch foot, like they just put a 1/4 inch foot on here for me, you can shift your needle, and then you can move it over, align it with your stitcher's friend again to get that scant 1/4 inch. Having a 1/4 inch foot's a little easier because it kind of butts up to the side of that foot, and it keeps it more even, and it's kind of less error, less room for error when you're doing that seam line. So I will cut this, and we'll head back over to the iron for one more press. Again, remember, we're going to press to the dark side, so we're going to press to the gray side of this. And if you're doing really light colors on both of them, and you don't know which one the dark side is, for this pattern specifically, you want to press your seams in opposite directions. So if you're doing lightly colored fabrics, and you know which one is really the dark side, at the end of the day, you're wanting these to go opposite for this pattern. So I'll bring this up. This gray side is facing up towards me. Grab my iron, and then hold that there. Kind of open this up the rest of the way down, and press this over. Remember to always check your seam to make sure that it didn't flip over. Sometimes it likes to run away on us. So we're going to do this nice and press, press, press. If you have excess threads lying out, that's where your little scissors come in handy. So don't be afraid to trim those away. So open that up, trim. I think Diana can grab that for me while I'm pressing.
And I think they just press all the way down, and then they're ready to cut.
Press all the way down and cut, yep. So like I said, pressing is the longest part of the process, but we wanted to make sure y'all got to see the whole process. We're going to do this first section with you, and then you would repeat these steps throughout it until you're done with the rest of your blocks. So pull that through. Coming back over, make sure you're pressing over. And you can kind of see, once again, I'm pushing that seam open with this press. Just want to make sure you get those lines nice and straight. And for one more solid press all the way through, I like to flip this over just to make sure my seams didn't flip on me. And they didn't, which is good, yay. Doesn't happen very often. Most of the time they normally flip on me. But another press never hurts it. And this was just a quick one. All the way down. Oh, that last one got a little flip on me. There it did. All right, just like that. Okay, so now we get to cut.
Yay!
This is fun. I would get all of these ready before you go to cutting. That way you can just cut all the way through. You're not back and forth to your sewing machine. But on this first section, we're going to go and start cutting for you. So I'm going to move this over to my cutting board, or my cutting mat. I'm going to grab my basics template. And at the beginning, we talked about having those little clear gripper dots. And I've placed these on this template in 4 different corners. And that keeps this template nice and steady. So I'm going to have this template facing up towards me where I can read basics. And I'm going to line these lines up, these 2 vertical lines, with the seam line that I've created in my fabric and my strips. So I'm going to lay those right on top of each other, just like that. Oh, lines up beautifully. Just like that. And then I can hold that template, because I have those gripper dots, it's not going to move. Grab your rotary cutter, cut, cut, off to the side a little bit here, cut. I like to flip this back, and then we'll cut right there. And that's your first piece, just like that.
Wow.
You'll have these little excess pieces, and these are going to be called your basics bits. You can keep these, and there is actually a pattern in there to sew these together to make a border if you wanted to.
Oh, that's cool. That way you're not wasting anything.
You're not wasting any. So this is your first block that you'll be cutting, and you're going to be making 63 of these.
Okay.
So you just set that off to the side, and then you're going to grab your next one.
I'll move that. Now, we have a rotating mat. Does that make it easier to...
Yes and no. I think it works faster just to kind of go around it.
Okay.
I tried the rotating function the first time when I made this, and it felt like it was just more effort than it was worth for this particular pattern.
Got it. But probably for a bigger block, it'd be nice.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So set that to the side. Got my little bits. I can set those there in a pile and work my way through.
Okay.
So just lining up those lines. But the biggest thing with the basics patterns that we get calls on is my lines aren't lining up properly. It has everything to do with that scant 1/4 inch. That's what the template's designed to use, so make sure that you're following that and using your stitcher's friend to come up with that. So going through that, and like I said, you should be able to get 7 of these blocks out of each section of strips that you make. So line that, and we're just going to keep cutting. You'll get into a rhythm really quickly about this, and you'll be able to zoom all the way around pretty soon. Move your little bits off to the side, and look at me, I'm shifting like my iron. Just moving down the side. Set that there. Cut, 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 and cut. While we're doing this, another question that we get from beginners and from some very advanced quilters too, and sewers, how do you keep your blades so sharp when you are cutting? And we can get, because we cut tons and tons of wide back here, we like the Olfa Endurance blades, right, Diana? Mm-hmm. The Endurance blades just allow you to keep cutting for a little bit of a longer time, and then of course always make sure that you shut your rotary cutter each time that you're not using it, so it doesn't get nicked, and that'll help save your blade life as well. So lining up for our last one here, cut, 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 move my little bits off to the side, again fold that back, get right up to that, and cut.
All right.
So then you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I'm going to grab my pattern, and I'm going to take a look at what's next in the steps that I need to do. So looking at the overall design that I have, we've got gray stars, and we have these yellows, which yellow translates to our aqua stars. So our first row contains 3 full blocks of gray stars, and then a half block of a gray star, so half a gray star. So you're going to want to make 3 full blocks of gray stars, and then that half one right there. So you're going to have to cut what you need to create that first row, and then you'll piece it to the following row after that. So I'm going to go ahead and move my pattern off this side and begin to build my pieces. So we're doing 3 gray stars, and I'm going to set this, let's go right here. Let's use our cutting mat for this. So I'm going to set my first one right here. I'm going to take that same block, rotate it clockwise, set that here, same block, lay it in that same portion, rotate it again clockwise, right there, and one last time, lay like that, rotate clockwise, and that's how you're going to build that gray section.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's super, super simple. And then when it comes from a piecing side of things, I'm going to piece here and here. So I like to fold these together the way I'm going to need to piece them. So I'm going to fold it like that. And I'll grab a pin to keep it nice and flat and steady. And it also tells me where I need to do my seam line. So I'm going to grab a pin. I'm going to set it right here. And that tells me that I need to sew right on this section. So flip these together. Put a pin there, just so I know that I need to sew on that section. You're still going to be using a scant 1/4 inch all the way through this whole thing. So then I'll take these 2 pieces and I'm going to head over to the sewing machine. And I am going to start with my first section. I'll pull that pin out, but I know that's going to need to go this way. So I'll pull that pin out, set that pin to the side. I'm going to line these up to get them nice and even together all the way through. Put this underneath my foot. Slow down your machine a little bit if you're using a button or your foot pedal. Just keep it nice and slow when you're piecing things together. So we're going to piece this way. Make sure to watch your seams and your presses to make sure nothing flips on accident, because it will get away from you. Take that all the way. And you can do what we call chain piecing, which keeps it going, and you just cut it later. So I'm not going to move that from there. I'm going to leave it where it's at. I'm going to take my next one. It needs to go that way with the seam. So I'll pull my pin out, set it to the side, line these sections up where the block needs to be, like that. Put that underneath the foot. Again, lining it up. And then I can start stitching right from there. So if you have a bunch of these already made and ready to go, where you just need to sit down and sew them, you can chain piece them together like this, and then trim your threads away once that chain piecing's done. So we'll finish that off. I'm done with that block, so I'll go ahead and trim this, pull up my foot, head back over to the cutting table, and I'm going to take my scissors and just trim those threads right in between those pieces. Just like that. I'll open this up. There's one. And there's another one. Just like that. So let's press these seams. Move my pieces out of the way. And remember we talked about pressing in opposite directions. There's also a meaning for that. When you're putting these together, it helps the seams sit better. So what I want you to do is lay these the exact same direction. Just like that. And we're going to press our seam. And there's not really a dark side on this one. You're just holding this open, pushing that seam over, just like that. Make sure that seam doesn't flip on you. Move that off to the side. Press that over, just like that. Same thing with this one, because they're going the same direction right now. That's laying flat. Pick that up. Using your iron, you're going to push it over so that seam begins to lay flat. Okay. So we're going to press that down. Both of them are nice and pressed. And now when you flip it back over for them to match up together, your press seams are going in opposite directions. That one's pointing up and that other one's pointing down. So just a quick way to kind of counteract which way do I actually need to press it. So then what I'm going to do is I'll lay these together just like that. And the seams going in those opposite directions, I know it's probably hard for you to see on camera, but they meet up beautifully right here in the center when they kind of butt up together. And when we go over to the sewing machine, I'll give you a better look. But those seams in the center, they butt up together and they just sit right in each other, and they come together to make a point beautifully. I'm also going to take a pin and set it in that point just to make sure that it stays together on its trip to the sewing machine. So let's head over there, and let me give you a closer visual of what that means with them setting apart. So I'll pull the pin out, and if you can see, those seams just press in right together, and they lay nice and flat, and they butt up right next to each other, which comes out with a beautiful finished product. So set my pin off to the side, line my edges up together, lay that under the foot, and begin our stitching process. Remember, take it nice and slow. If something shifts, don't be afraid to kind of pause what you're doing. Move it back into alignment. Take the extra time now so you don't have to worry about it at the end. Piece that together. Going all the way through this block. Once that's done, we can stop that, trim our thread. Let's open it right. Oh, had a little left extra there. That happens. And just open it right there, and that's what we have. But we're overhead, but it just comes together so pretty. So one more time, back over to the cutting board. And that's the block that we get right there. So we're going to come in with a press. Once again, lay that like that. Press over. And I'm doing this from the back side this time because I got a lot of seams now. I'm going to do this one from the back side. And this is just a press and a press. Be careful not to go like pull your iron anywhere, because with all these other seams you might flip another one on accident. So go where you need to and then just press directly on that. No need to move the iron. We'll flip it back over. And now at this point, if you wanted to move your iron, you could, just to go over everything. But look at how those points come together just like that. Isn't that pretty, Diana?
That's really pretty, yeah.
Comes together just like that.
So once you get this part done, you would basically probably put that on your design wall and then start making the rest of them for that line, right?
Right. So let's take a look at our design wall and see where we're at right now. So our design wall, like we talked about earlier, is consisted of grid flannel that we carry here in the store. But this grid flannel helps me line up things nice and straight. As a quilter and a sewer and someone that has a little bit of OCD, it's nice to kind of get things on the wall nice and straight, and it just kind of attaches to that with just a little bit of a press. You can get that laying on your grid wall and then begin to add more pieces to it as you go.
Perfect. I love how design wall, you can actually like put everything together. That way you can look at it first before you take it over to the sewing machine. Probably makes it a little bit easier so you don't get confused, right?
Especially just in case you sewed the wrong color somewhere or have a wrong piece flip somewhere, you can definitely see it really easily.
So with this grid flannel fabric, you can actually lay out the whole quilt and then go do it together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool.
So what we're going to do, we're going to do this off camera. We'll meet you back. We're going to do 2 more of these gray stars all the way across, and then a half one, which will be this half right here, to go on this side, and we'll meet you back at the design wall to take a look at what it's going to come out to be like. Okay, so I just finished up the last block to add to our row. So we've got 3 grays and a half a gray star, so that's what we've got right now on our design wall. So what we're going to do is you'll begin to piece these together. You'll piece your blocks completely, so you can just fold them together the way you're going to do it. So I would take this last one, fold it on top of the previous one. We're going to have a seam line right there, so you can put a pin right there. And since you're already over at the sewing machine, you could take your next section, fold it over, put a pin, and sew those lines together, and I'll meet you back over here at the design wall. All right, so we just finished row 1, so we're back over here on the design wall. This row is a little heavy, especially when you start to add on a bunch of pieces. You may have to pin it onto your design wall, so don't be afraid to do that. So I'll come back over here, grab this with another pin and place that. Now I've already finished the rest of the pieces, so we're going to add that onto the section. So Diana's going to hand that to me, thank you. And you'll see how this gets to be built together now. So if I come in, here's the extra section. I'll pin on this section as well. So let me grab some pins. All right, so we're gonna line this up, and you'll see that those other stars start to be built. So I'll put this one right underneath with a pin again, because this got really heavy. Pull over here, add that one on, and you'll see that all that gets to meet up nicely. Just like that. It might be a little bit of a gap because I have it spaced a little differently. But you get to double check everything, make sure everything's hitting the way it needs to. That would be the rest of the quilt. So we're going to add row 1 onto the rest. So we're just going to flip that over, sew on our seam line there, and we'll meet back overhead to take a look at borders. Okay, so looking at borders, what we're first going to do is take the pieces of the quilt top that we have, and we're going to lay that out nice and flat, and we're going to be working with the longer side of the quilt top first. And you want to get that lined up, or you want to get it measured so you can get the distance that you need to cut your strips to make your borders on your quilt. You never just want to lay the strip on and start sewing. You want to measure what you have and attach it to the quilt top with pins. That way you know it's going to fit that perfectly and not stretch or morph the quilt top. So I've got this laid on my cutting mat, and I've got it measured out to be about 40.5 inches. And the way you determine how your borders work, you can go off what the pattern does. I like to kind of keep it opposite. So right now at this side, I've got this turquoise color. What I want to do is I'm going to put a gray border next to that so that turquoise doesn't fall into another turquoise strip. And on the opposite side, I've got gray, so I'll put a turquoise on that side. So let's go ahead and cut our strips, again, 40.5 inches. So we'll move our quilt top out of the way, and we'll grab our strips. I've already got 2 ironed and ready. So let's start with gray, for instance. And you have on the edges of your strips, you have what we call selvage. You'll want to trim that off. Don't include that in your count. So I'll grab my little basics template that I have, which is great for a straight edge ruler as well, and line that up. Take my rotary cutter, and I will just cut off that selvage. And I'm going to take my strip, line it up to the side, and I want to get that 40.5 inch measurement. Don't stretch the strip, just get it laying on there really nice. Take your template again, just so you have a nice straight edge. Line that up with that 40.5 mark, or if you're measuring, go ahead and use like a chalk pencil or something to mark that. And we're going to cut at 40.5. So that's our first one. Move this off to the side. Do the same thing for the other side, which in this case is going to be this aqua color. I'm going to trim off my selvage real quick. Don't ever include that in your measurement. Trim that off. And then we will line this strip up with that same measurement. So we're coming through again, 40.5 inches for this one. And yours might be a little different, that's okay. But go off what you have measured on your quilt top to make it work for you. So get that cut, set our pieces to the side, and now we have our 2 strips. So we're going to pin those onto the first side of the border, of the quilt top, excuse me. So I'll take my quilt top, lay that out again. We're doing turquoise first on this side, or aqua first, so I'll grab my gray strip, line that up. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that I am pinning the edges of my border to the edge of my quilt top. That's how I know it's going to keep it consistent with the actual size that we measured. So I'm going to grab this strip, line it up, take a pin, and I'm going to just pin that in, just like so, in and out. I'm going to come to the other side, grab a pin, and I will pin that side as well, in and out. And now that you have your sides pinned down, what you'll do is you will work from there, either center out. Normally that's what I like to do, is come from the center and work my way out. So I'll start here, and then I will begin to just pin. And you just have to have a few just to keep it steady, and you'll take these pins out as you are sewing on the sides of those borders. It just helps keep it nice and steady, keeps it nice and flat, and keeps it from skewing. which sometimes will happen. So that's our one side. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, so we'll just rotate this around. And since we have gray on this side, we're going to do our aqua colored strip. Line that down. You're going to match up your edges. So we'll match up one here. We're going to come to our other edge, match up that one as well. And then we will go from center out in our pinning. So we'll do this one, come here into the center. Got a few extra pins here. So pin, go about halfway, pin, and then halfway on this side and pin. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch down the sides to pull these in. I'm going to do that on both sides, and then I'm going to add on the borders on the shorter side. And you can change those colors up. You could do, since this is gray, you could do that aqua color here. And since this is aqua, you could do gray on this side. And you'll begin to build your borders that way. But you're going to start with your longer side and then do shorter, and then longer again and do shorter. You're going to have 2 borders all the way around this quilt when it's done. So I'll meet you back once you have all your borders placed on your quilt. Just went through how to put the first two side borders on, and I'm using this sample as an idea to show you how to put the rest of the borders on, just to give you a little bit more clarification on the process. So we just did the 2 side borders right here. So once those are done, you will press your seams outwards on both sides. You'll then get a measurement from side to side of your new borders on your quilt top. Then you'll cut your strip to that size, and then you will add your side border here and here. Once you have those sewn on, press your seams outwards once again. You're going to get that new measurement from side to side, cut your strips to that measurement, and add it here and here. You'll press your seams outward once more, get one more measurement, cut your strips to match, and go from here to here. And that is how you're going to put your borders on this entire quilt. So you're going to have 2 borders all the way around. You're just going to go long, short, long, short.
Now that we have the top all done, Corey did an awesome job showing them how to do it.
Thank you.
You have a few decisions to make. Do you want to quilt it yourself, or do you want to send it out to a quilter to be done?
Right.
If you're not sure how to find a quilter, you can always contact your local quilt store and they can help you with that. But if you're doing that, you're done. You just hand it off to them and they finish it. If you're going to actually quilt it yourself, you are going to need a few more items. So we want to make sure we go over that before we go on to the next step.
Definitely.
Okay, Corey, so go ahead and tell me a few things they need.
So the first thing that you'll need in this process is batting, and that is the inner layer between the top of your fabric and the backing of your fabric. Now, these colors that we went with today in this quilt are brightly colored fabrics, besides the gray.
Yeah.
But everything else is nice and bright. And so in this instance, we would probably prefer to do a white batting to keep the true color of the fabric. If you're working with more neutrals or tone-on tones that are more on that tan side, or even some different colors, you could do a natural color batting. Or if you're doing dark colored fabrics like navies and royal purples, you could do a black batting to keep that natural. If you're just getting started out for the first time, we always recommend that you do probably an 80-20 batting. It kind of withstands everything when you're getting started out. So this is an 80-20 Hobbs bleached batting for the project. And then the next thing that you'll want to do is find backing for your quilt. If you're making large quilts, we carry a wide selection of 108 to 120 inch wide fabric, so you don't have to seam it together.
Correct.
Or if you find that, that really particular one that's only 44 inches wide, make sure you seam it together properly, and you'll just want to find some backing that coordinates with the colors that you have on the front. Okay,
so once you've got your batting that you've selected and your backing, you're going to have to pick a thread that you want to use. So really, it just depends on thread of choice. Again, if you're really new, stick to whatever your machine manufacturer suggests, maybe, or maybe what came with your long arm or your mid arm or your sit down. But it's really just picking out that thread that you want to use, right?
All comes down to color at the end of the day most of the time.
It really does.
Yeah.
So we carry about 26 different lines of thread, and so really at that point,
Quite a
it's
few choices.
picking your color that you want to do.
Right.
But definitely you'll have to pick those 3 items. Now, one thing I think he forgot to mention on the backing was that you always want to make sure that you have an extra 4 to 6 inches on each side.
All the way around.
All the way
not just
around.
Sides, yeah.
So even if you're sending it to a quilter, they're going to want that. But definitely if you're doing it yourself, make sure you have that extra backing. That's extremely important.
Right.
And also extra batting.
Right. So now that we've given you all the tools that you need to make your quilt, we're going to actually get it quilted, and then we'll meet you back over here and we're going to look at how to bind the quilt. That's the finishing edges around it so it can keep the batting and everything all secure inside of it and have a nice beautiful edge.
Yep.
Okay, so we just got the quilt all quilted and finished, pulling off a few of the little excess threads that pop up. I did edge up the quilt already, so I took a straight edge. You could also use your basic template that you have and line that up and cut with your rotary cutter on a cutting mat just to get rid of excess batting and backing that appears. So now we get to the fun part of binding the quilt. So what we're going to do is you're going to be, for this particular quilt, going to take 5 strips that you have from one of your junior jelly rolls, and I'm going to use the white strips, and I'm using white just to frame it really well. And how I got 5 is a calculation that my grandma taught me. If you have questions about that or how to come up with that on larger quilts or different quilts, look at our binding video on our YouTube channel. It's got some great information on how to bind a quilt in a little bit more depth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these strips, lay it nice and flat, and then I'm going to take another one of my strips, and I'm going to lay that one and have it kind of going off to the right. And I've got the selvage edges exposed on both sides. Don't want to have that in there. I don't want to meet these up together like this when I'm making my binding strips. I want them to be a little bit off to the side and exposed like that. Now we're going to head over to the sewing machine here shortly, and you're going to sew all these strips together, and we're going to do just a regular straight line stitch from this point to this point. And when it folds over, it's going to end up making a longer strip, just like that. But if you ever have a question about how you're making those strips, just remember, take one of them, lay it more up to the north, and take another one and lay it off to the east. And you can also take a pin if you need to know exactly where you're going to take that sew line and pin these together. Once you have them laying properly where you'd like, pin them together in that same direction. That way you know that's the way that you need to go. So you're going to pull all these together, and what I prefer to do is sew one and then come back and put another one on and then sew the next one. That way I don't get poked with the pin. But we're going to head over to the sewing machine. We're going to do that just right now. Okay, so over here at the machine, what we're going to want to do is figure out where the straight actual line of this is. Since we have to stitch from one side of that strip to the other, like we talked about a second ago, we like to have a straight line to follow. So what I can do, and this is just kind of a visual for you to see, is with these strips, come right over here so we can do this. With these strips, we've got to go all the way from one point to another point, and that can be kind of confusing where you're going in a straight line from here all the way to here if you don't have a visual to follow. So what you can do is take a piece of painter's tape, masking tape, anything you've kind of got around, and your sewing machine should have little markings on the bobbin case area, the bobbin area here. And the furthest one to the left is normally your straight line, as long as your needle is, at the straight line mark. We're not doing a scant 1/4 inch or a regular 1/4 inch or anything like that. This is just a regular straight line stitch. So you can take your masking tape and line that up to that line mark and take this and go all the way down, and now you've got a nice line to follow. So now when I place my strips right there where I want to stitch them together, so let's get that line back up again. There we go. That there together. Now I have a nice mark to match up with from there all the way to there. So I can get my foot down, place that where I want it to start, make sure this is lined up right there, and you're just going to follow that all the way up. And that's how you're going to know you're going to stay in a straight line. follow that all the way to there. And we'll cut our threads just so you can see it, but that has that perfect line from there to there just by following that masking tape. So you're going to do that same process all the way through for all 5 of your strips, and then I'll meet you back at the cutting table and we'll put them together. Okay, so we've got all of our strips pieced together for our binding, and you're going to have the little excess pieces here that we have, kind of that side of the selvage and different things like that. So you're going to want to make sure you trim that away. Maybe leave yourself 1/4 of an inch between the seam and your cut. You can definitely eyeball that if you want, but you're just going to take your rotary cutter or your scissors and just trim, and you're going to trim off the sides. There might be a little bit of excess on the sides as well. So give yourself a little trim like that. That way it lies nice and flat when we take it over and press it. So that's our first one. We'll find the next one. You're going to do this all the way through. And like I said, you could definitely just eyeball this. No one's going to catch you if it's not a perfect 1/4 of an inch by any means. But we're going to take this all the way through. Trim off any little excess side pieces that we see. And we should have one left. There we go. Trim that one away. And side piece, just like that. Move our excess pieces off to the side. And I want to go ahead, and it makes it a little bit easier if you press this seam open when you're doing your binding. So if I open this up and kind of nail press this down, if I have my stitcher friend with me, I could press that. But I'm just going to take this with my iron, press that down, press that seam nice and open, and then move on to the next one. You're going to do that through all of your seams in your binding strips. And that helps with the fold, because we have to fold these binding strips together, to fold them in half, excuse me, not together, but fold them in half, and that's going to help with that piece. So we're just going to press all the way through this, and we'll move on to our next section. It's probably the most tedious part. It was the same way when we were doing the piecing of it. The most tedious part of the piecing process is the pressing side of things. But it makes it well worth it at the end of the day. Okay, so we've got one more left to do. So we're going to open this seam up just a little bit. Kind of do like a finger press, or like I said, or if you have your stitcher's friend nearby, you can grab that. And it kind of helps you open up your seam. I'm just going to press this open, just like that. Beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to take these strips and we're going to fold them together, and we're fold that right in half together just like that. We want those open seams on the inside of that fold. Okay, we don't want those to be exposed. They need to be on that inside. So I just start at one end, fold this in half. Have your iron ready, and then you'll just work your way down, a good press all the way through that whole section. And just remember, have those seams, those open seams, inside that fold. Do not have that exposed on the outside. So go ahead and press all of that down all the way through, and then I'll meet you back right here and we'll look at how we're going to put it on the quilt. Okay, so we have our binding pressed and ready to go on the quilt. The folded side of your binding will be facing towards the inside of the quilt. The side that opens up will be facing towards the outside of the quilt. And we're going to place that on the edge. I always like to start somewhere about in the middle of the quilt when we're doing our binding, and leave yourself about 7-8 inches extra of binding before, so that you would start right where my finger is right here and leave that kind of hanging, and we'll meet that up when we get around to that edge to finish it off. So we're going to head over to the machine and we will start stitching down. We're going to do a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance stitch here. And we're just going to take this all the way around, and we'll head over to the machine to start doing that. Okay, so over here at the sewing machine, we've got binding ready. Remember, leave that extra 7-8 inches before you get started, and start about midway through your quilt. And we're just going to get going. 1/4 inch seam allowance on this one. And we'll start stitching. Biggest thing with this one, kind of let the machine take in the quilt. Don't force it through. Just let that roll in naturally. readjust the binding and the quilt top. Sometimes it likes to move around on you. And we're just going to stitch all the way to the, almost all the way to the edge. Not directly to it. You're going to stop about 1/4 of an inch before you get to that edge. And what I'm going to do is I will take my Stitcher's Friend, and it has 1/4 of an inch marking line on it, and I'm going to line that 1/4 of an inch marking line up with the bottom of the quilt, or the end of the quilt, and that's going to give me 1/4 of an inch. So then I'll just use my pen and make a marking on my fabric. It doesn't have to be anything really super, heavy. It's just enough that you can see it. So I'll make that marking, and I'm going to keep stitching until I get to that marking. Until my needle hits that mark. I'm going to stop right there, and I'll lift my foot up just a hair, and I'm going to turn this, and I want to go straight off the edge at a 45. I want to go up to the end of the point there. So I'll stitch off that. I can tie that off. And I can then turn this quilt so I can start working down the other side. And I want to take my binding that I've got and I want to pull it up towards that 45. And I can take my Stitcher's Friend, use the seam press side of it and give a nice press down. And then I want to hold that there and flip backwards. So you want to have this little piece, that kind of little triangle there, lying over that 45, and you want to match your sides up again with the edge of the quilt. So then we'll place that underneath, and you're going to start right from the edge and start stitching. You don't need to come in 1/4 of an inch, right from that edge and start stitching. So we're going to come right into there, and then we'll continue on around the quilt. So we're going to come all the way around the quilt until we get around that last edge, and I'll meet you at the last point so we can line this up and finish it off properly. Okay, so we're rolling up towards the end. We just made our last corner, and I want to leave plenty of excess room, so I'm probably going to stop right about here. Trim my threads real quick. And let's look at how we're going to attach these two pieces together to keep them working continuously. So as you can see, I've got plenty of excess over my point where I started here, or the end of my piece where I started stitching way down here. So I want to trim off some of this excess. Don't want to go too far. Probably just need, about that much of your excess. So I'm going to grab some scissors and I'm just going to trim that away. And this is little piece that we have left. And this is going to help us determine how far we need to cut these excess strips before we piece them together. So I'm going to take this strip that I've just cut from my excess, and I'm going to lay it on top of my beginning piece. And we need to give these some vocabulary real quick, so it's going to be easier coming forward. So we'll call this the beginning piece, and this is the running piece. So we've got beginning piece and running piece. So I'm going to lay this piece that I cut on top of my beginning piece and butt it up right up to the top of that beginning piece. So it's just laying right over that. I'm going to lay this running piece right over, and that's going to tell me exactly where I need to cut. So I need to follow down my piece that I cut, and I want to trim my running piece right up to the end of that little split that I made. So I'll grab my scissors, and I'm just going to trim right there. Give myself a little bit of a cut first, and then come off to the side here. So I'm going to trim that away. And once I have that trimmed, I can put my little cut piece and the rest of my running piece off to the side. And that's what I've got. It's a little jagged. That's okay. It's going to get trimmed away anyway, so don't worry about that. So what you're going to do is take your running piece, open that up, take it towards that kind of right-hand side here, and you want that crease to be pointing up. You're going to you have to pull up a little bit of your quilt, but you're going to take your beginning piece, you're going to open that up, and you want your crease to be pointing down. And they're going to lay just like this on top of each other. So you've got crease pointing down from your beginning piece, and the crease pointing up from that running piece. Okay. We'll lay those right on top of one another. And like I say, you might have to pull up your quilt a little bit. Lay those right on top of one another. Match them up. Give a little bit of excess off to the side. And you are going to stitch a line, straight line, from the top left point to the bottom right point. This is going to be a straight line. And you're going to take that underneath your machine. Line that up. And I still have my 1/4 inch stitch on, so I can't use my tape to follow. But this is just one that I'll just eyeball real quick. And you're just going to take that all the way through. Just like that. So now when you pull these back, that's going to lay nice and flat. And the only thing you have to do is trim this away. So we're going to take that. I'm going to grab my scissors. And I will trim off this, kind of keeping that same idea that we did when we were making our strips. Give yourself about a 1/4 inch variance to work with. It does not have to be perfect by any means. And you'll even see once I open this up, it's a little jagged even, because my scissors aren't the best. I don't know what happened to my other ones, but that's okay. We're going to set that off to the side. I'm going to press this seam open just like we did the rest of our strips. So I'll take this, I'm going to grab my stitcher's friend. Open up this seam real quick, and it gets to be a little tight. That's why I say leave plenty of excess room. But you're just going to grab this stitcher's friend and kind of open up that seam because you're going to want to press that down. And you don't have to take it to the ironing board. Just use the seam press side of the stitcher's friend and just press that nice and open. Like I said, even if it's jagged, that's okay. It's just going on the inside of it anyway, so no big deal. So we'll finish pressing this open best we can. And then when we pull that, that's going to lay nice and flat. We'll finish off the stitching on this, and it's going to meet up beautifully with the other part. So we're just going to keep on going. Keep on going. Make sure it doesn't shift on you. Take this all the way through. We're almost done with this part. Line that up. Last one here. Okay. That meets up with that. We'll trim our threads away. And that's what we have right there. So now let's head over to the cutting board and the pressing board. And we're going to press this over and around. That way when we come back, we can do a nice stitch in the ditch in here for our final binding piece. So let's head over to the pressing board. And what I will do is just lay this quilt just like that. Grab your iron. And I'm going to take my hot iron, press this over. And I want a nice press on this all the way around. This is really going to help you when you're binding that final piece. Keep it from flipping back on you. You're going to take this all the way around. One thing on your corners here, you're going to just flip those right over. And that's going to give you a nice point there. So you're just going to keep pressing these, and we're going to press all the way around this quilt. Once this is completely pressed all the way around, you're going to flip it around. And I'm just going to do this tiny little portion for time. You'll flip it around. You're going to flip this binding piece over onto the back, and you're going to press it here as well. This one, spend a little bit more time pressing. That way it stays in place for you. You can also pin this so it stays in place for you. It's just going to really help out when you're doing the final part of your binding. So we're going to press this all the way around both sides, and then I would recommend putting pins in to make it easier for binding. Okay, y'all, so I'm back over here to the sewing machine, and this is that last step in our quilt journey. So for this, what I've done is, like, remember we talked about at the pressing station, you're going to press it over and then press it over again. I also have pins in here to keep it, flat and stable. And what you're going to do is you're going to put a straight line stitch on, and you're just going to do stitch in the ditch right between the binding and your quilt. If you have that straight line stitch on, you can kind of follow the inside of the foot to help you with that. And you're going to travel all the way around and just take those pins out as you go. And don't be afraid to take this slow when you're first doing it, especially for your very first time. Sometimes you just really want to take it nice and easy. And you can even slow down the machine a little bit. That way it falls right in the ditch. And don't be afraid to kind of manipulate it to make sure it stays where you need it. When you get to that next pin, pull the pin out, set it to the side, and then keep stitching. You're going to do this all the way around your quilt, and you'll be done with your binding. Okay, coming up here to the end, I got one last pin to take out. Left a little thread tail to show me where I need to stop and start. But we are almost done with this. We'll get there, and I will trim off my threads, and we're all set. So I can trim off any excess pieces, and then I'm going to head back over to set.
Okay, Corey, we have to show them this finished product.
Okay, it's all bound, it's all done. There it is.
I love it. I love it.
So
this
quilted it the exact same way as our first sample.
And we do that because it's an easier pattern to start with, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a good beginner pattern if you're getting started. Also, if you're looking at quilts that have a lot, or you made a quilt that has a lot of points or sharp lines in it, when it comes to quilting, if you send it off to a long armor or you do it yourself, make sure you mention or take a look at, with all those straight lines, you want to look at a pattern quilting that's going to kind of break up those straight lines. So something with swirls, with curves, something like a meander, so it doesn't fall into the ditch of the piecing by accident, and then you lose that pattern on the front.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Super cool. So now that we've shown you the whole process, it really just took just a few simple things that we had in our store.
Rolling on back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep.
So some jelly rolls,
Yep.
awesome jelly rolls that we have available
We do
for
these
you on our
little junior
website.
ones. Yep.
And then
The basic template.
Yeah. So, and the pattern was already there for you,
Yeah.
right? So all this is on our website, longarmsupplies.net. The link will be in the description. That was awesome.
Right.
That was a great presentation on how to start from the beginning to the finished. And I think it'll really help everybody that is just not sure how to start this process.
Or what is a quilt?
Or what is a quilt, right? Exactly.
Exactly.
Anyway, well, thanks for joining us. We really love having you here, and I guess we'll see you next time.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Bye.